Elisha Hunt Rhodes was a man whose life spanned the stormiest years in American history, and whose words have echoed far beyond his time. Born on March the 21st, 1842, in the village of Pawtuxet, Cranston, Rhode Island, he was the eldest son of Captain Elisha Hunt and Eliza Ann Rhodes, and a direct descendant of Roger Williams, the founder of the Rhode Island colony. His early years were shaped by education at local schools and a brief period at Potter and Hammond's Commercial College in Providence. But at just 16, his path took a sudden and tragic turn. In December of 1858, his father, master of the coastal schooner Worcester, was lost at sea in a shipwreck off Linyards Cay in the Bahamas. Young Elisha, still a teenager, was thrust into the role of breadwinner for his family. He left school and took a job as a clerk in the office of Frederick Miller, a supplier to New England's mills. But it was the outbreak of the Civil War that would define his life and his legacy. On June 5, 1861, Elisha enlisted as a private in Company D of the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers. Over the next 4 years, he marched with the Army of the Potomac through nearly every major campaign, from Bull Run to Antietam, Fredericksburg to Gettysburg, and finally to Appomattox. Rising quickly through the ranks, he was promoted to colonel by the war's end in 1865. Rhodes's simple yet vivid diary entries, written in real time and later recopied by hand in 1885, capture the unvarnished thoughts of a young man coming of age amid the chaos of war. These writings, never intended for publication, would decades later capture the attention of documentary filmmaker Ken Burns. Alongside the words of fellow soldier Sam Watkins, Elisha Rhodes's diary became a central narrative in the Civil War, Burns's iconic PBS series that brought the voices of everyday soldiers into homes across America. After the war, Elisha returned to Rhode Island, married Caroline Pierce Hunt, and raised a family. He took over his former employer's business, co-founding Dunham and Rhodes Company, and traveled widely across the South and West, forming lasting ties with other veterans. His military service continued in peacetime. He became Brigadier General of the Rhode Island Militia in 1879, a position he held until 1893. He also became one of the leading figures in veteran affairs, organizing reunions, raising funds for battlefield monuments, and serving as the first commander of Prescott Post Number, one of the Grand Army of the Republic. He played a central role in the creation of the Soldiers and Sailors Historical Society of Rhode Island and held leadership roles in Masonic and fraternal organizations. Throughout his life, Elisha Hunt Rhodes remained a devoted church member, a public servant, and a man deeply committed to his fellow soldiers and citizens. He served on the Providence School Board, was appointed Collector of Internal Revenue by President Grant, and later became assessor of taxes for the city. Though encouraged to run for governor, he humbly declined. Rhodes died on January 14, 1917, at the age of 75. He had lived a life of service on the battlefield, in his church, in public office, and in memory of his comrades. This audiobook brings to life the diary and letters he left behind, pages that speak not with polished rhetoric but with the clear, earnest voice of a soldier recording history as he lived it. These are the reflections of a young man caught in the greatest conflict his country had ever known, written not for the world, but for himself. And now, more than a century later, we are privileged to listen in. If you enjoy this type of content, please like and subscribe. These are his words. Let's begin. The 1st Rhode Island Detached Militia, under the command of Colonel Ambrose E. Burnside, has left the state for the seat of war. Military spirit runs high, and I, in common with the other young men, feel that it is my duty to serve in the field. I tried hard to go with the 1st Regiment, but my mother, being a widow and having 2 younger brothers to support, I resisted the inclination to enlist. At this time I am 19 years of age, and for 2 years have been employed at the office of Frederick Miller, Esquire, Reed and Harness Manufacturers, number 92 Canal Street, Providence, as a clerk. My mother lives in the village of Pawtuxet, and with her and my sister and 2 brothers, I spend my Sundays. Late in the month of April, Governor Sprague issued an order stating that the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers would be immediately enlisted for 3 years' service and called upon the citizens to enlist. Saturday night, I visited my home and laid the matter before my mother. She at once refused her consent, and giving as a reason that I was her only support, I was forced to promise that I would remain at home until such time as she might consent to my enlisting. The next Sunday was a sorrowful one at our home. My mother went about with tears in her eyes, while I felt disappointment that I could not express, and therefore nursed my sorrow in silence. Sunday night, after I had retired, my mother came to my room and, with a spirit worthy of a Spartan mother of old, said, "My son, other mothers must make sacrifices, and why should not I? If you feel that it is your duty to enlist, I will give my consent." She showed a patriotic spirit that much inspired my young heart. I did not sleep much that night and rose the next morning, which was early in May, and took the omnibus at 6 o'clock for Providence. On the omnibus, I met my old schoolmate, Levi F. Carr, and finding that his father had consented, we agreed to enlist together. On reaching Providence, we immediately went to the infantry armory at the corner of Weybosset and Dorrant Streets, and we took seats upon the stairs, it being only 7 o'clock in the morning. About 9 o'clock, Mr. William A. Arnold appeared, and upon inquiring, we found that he had been appointed as a recruiting officer and was about to open the armory and receive recruits. We followed him into the armory, and after he had properly headed a book for signature, Carr signed his name, he being my senior, and I followed. The boyhood home of Elisha H. Rhodes was in Pawtuxet, Rhode Island. Looking south on Broad Street, the house was opposite the corner of Sheldon Street. It is no longer standing. Recruits began to come in rapidly, and by the end of the week we had more than 100 names upon the books. The next Monday evening the company organized and elected officers as follows: Captain William B. Sears, First Lieutenant Thomas H. Carr, and First Sergeant James S. Hudson. We drilled day and night, and I was especially instructed by Mr. John E. Bradford, an old member of the Light Infantry Company. Standing before a long mirror, I put in many hours of weary work and soon thought myself quite a soldier. A call for recruits for the 1st Rhode Island Regiment having come, John E. Bradford and First Sergeant James S. Hudson left our company to join the 1st Regiment in Washington. I was elected First Sergeant, much to my surprise. Just what a first sergeant's duty might be, I had no idea, for I had never done duty in the militia and was ignorant of the first principles. We spent all our time in the armory and talked of nothing but soldiering. May 30th, 1861. An order has been issued by Governor Sprague that, after examination, a company will be formed from the best men now enlisted in the 1st Light Infantry Company, National Cadet Company, and Providence City Guards. During the day, Major John S. Slocum of the 1st Regiment, he is to be Colonel of the 2nd, and Surgeon Wheaton, Francis L., made their appearance at the armory and stated that only 25 men would be taken from the 1st Light Infantry. Major Slocum asked for someone to act as clerk, and I was detailed for this purpose. The colonel asked me if I was acquainted with the men and their general character, and on my saying that I knew them all quite well, he said, "We want only good men. Now when a good man comes in to be examined, you look up. If the man is not all right, you just go on with your writing." The first man that came in was my friend, Levi F. Carr. I looked up. Dr. Wheaton caused him to strip off his clothes, and as Levi was a large, robust young fellow, he gave him a severe examination, but he passed and went into another room. I then arose and said that I wanted to go. The doctor looked at me and said, "Young man, you cannot go. You are not fit to be a soldier." I begged of him to let me go, and told him of the days I had drilled and how much work I had done. The colonel finally asked me my age, state of health, if my father was living, and if my mother was willing for me to go. I answered his questions, and he said, "Put your name down. You can go." The doctor inquired if he should examine me, but the colonel said, "No," very decidedly. The doctor then said, "Why, Colonel, he will be in the hospital in a week, and we shall have to send him home." "Well," said the colonel, "we will send him home then." I was happy. The examination went on until a man came in who had enlisted and played the bully with us youngsters. He was a large, fine-built fellow, but I did not look up. The doctor said to him, "You cannot go. You are not a well man." The fellow looked his surprise and said, "What is wrong with me?" The doctor evidently did not expect this question, but he answered promptly, "You have a heart disease." I doubt if the fellow had a heart, for he was a tough customer. He denied this and insisted upon being examined, but the doctor declined, and he went out. I explained the matter, and we went on. As soon as the 25 men were selected, I was ordered to march them to the cadet armory and report to Captain William H. P. Steer. It was my first command, and I made the most of it. I marched the squad through Dorrance Street, down Westminster Street, through Exchange Street, Exchange Place, across the bridge, through Steeple Street to North Main Street, and up to the Cadet Armory in Arnold's Block. Here I formed the men in line and, saluting Captain Steer, said, "25 men from the infantry for your company, sir." The captain said, "I do not want them," and turned away. I did not know what to do, and so stood still. It seems that Captain Steer had already formed his company, and in order to make room for us, he had been obliged to turn out 25 men. The captain finally came up to me and said, "What were you in the infantry company?" I replied, "I was first sergeant, sir." "Well," said the captain, "you are a private here. Take your place in line." As I did not know much about sergeants or privates and cared less, I was satisfied. Levi Carr was a sergeant in the infantry, and the captain continued him in office. At night I wanted to go home, but the captain said that I was a soldier and must sleep in the armory. So I slept upon the floor with a lot of other fellows and howled most of the night, much to the disgust of the captain. As we were still citizens, we claimed the right to do about as we pleased. Here we drilled for several days. One evening the captain came to me and, taking me by the arm, led me to the left of the company and, putting me on the flank, said, "Rhodes, you are now 8th Corporal." This made me feel all right towards the captain, but just what an 8th Corporal had to do, I did not know, and why I should be 8th, I did not at the time understand. June 5th, 1861. Today our company marched to a building on the east side of Eddy Street, near Clifford Street, and was mustered into the United States service by Colonel Loomis, United States Army. The scene was a solemn one, and the impression made upon our minds will last a long time. We marched back to the armory, and during the evening I was fitted out with a uniform. It consisted of a blue flannel shirt, worn with the flaps outside of the pants, gray pants, fatigue or forage cap, and shoes. It was after dark, but I immediately donned my new rig, and, receiving permission, I walked to Pawtuxet, 5 miles distant, reaching there about 9 o'clock in the evening. Now I was an object of curiosity to my school friends. My mother shed many tears, but was still willing that I should go. This was my last visit home before leaving for the war. Today the regiment formed for the first time and marched to Exchange Place, where services in memory of Stephen A. Douglas were held. June 8, 1861, the regiment formed on Exchange Place and marched to the Dexter Parade Ground, where a camp was laid out and named Camp Burnside, in honor of the colonel of the 1st Rhode Island Detached Militia. Sibley tents were issued, and at night most of the companies were under canvas, but Company D, for some reason, failed to receive their tents. At noon, the entire regiment marched down the street to Railroad Hall for dinner, but by supper time the sheds on Dexter Street, opposite the camp, were ready, and we took supper there. The sheds, 4 in number, were built of rough lumber and were 100 by 25 feet. This night our company had to look for quarters to sleep, and our captain marched us to a carpenter shop, corner of Cranston and Gilmore Streets, where we slept upon the benches and floors. We did not howl all night either, for we found that, as we were now soldiers regularly mustered into the United States service, we could not do as we pleased. Sunday, June 9th, 1861. This morning the regiment marched to the First Baptist Church on North Main Street and listened to a sermon by Dr. Caldwell. Wednesday, June 12th, 1861. After dress parade, a set of colors was presented to the regiment by the ladies of Providence. This presentation attracted a large party of ladies and gentlemen and was conducted with great ceremony. Speeches were made by prominent citizens and much enthusiasm was shown by the men. Honorable Jabez C. Knight, Mayor of Providence, made the presentation. While encamped on Dexter Parade Ground, I performed my first duty. Captain Steer ordered me to report to Colonel Slocum with 2 privates, armed with sidearms, bayonets. On arrival at the colonel's unit, he said to me, "Corporal, take this paper and obey the instructions given." I read the paper and found that it was an order to proceed to a house on Richmond Street, and there arrest a deserter and bring him to camp, dead or alive. The dead or alive part caused me some uneasiness, but I started with my guard, consisting of Thomas W. D. Markham and James M. Bronson, privates of Company D. On arriving at the house, a young lady told me that the man I was looking for was her brother, and that he was sick in bed upstairs. I insisted upon going up, and entering a room, found a young man groaning in bed. After some conversation, during which he told me that he was very ill, my suspicions were excited, and by a sudden movement I stripped off the bedclothes and found that he had turned in, boots and all. I made him get up, and we went out into the street. Here he asked me to wait on the sidewalk while he went into a beer saloon, but I reminded him of my order, which I had already read to him, laying stress upon the dead or alive section, and we went on. We all sat down upon the steps of Grace Church and waited for an omnibus. He tried to persuade me to get into the omnibus first and let him sit next to the door in order that people might not think him a prisoner. I reversed this and let him get in first, and I took a seat by the door. On arrival at camp, I turned my prisoner over to the guard. This little adventure made some talk in the regiment, some of the men claiming that they would not have obeyed the order to arrest the man. But most of the men took a more soldier-like view of it and thought it right to obey orders. June 16th, 1861. This morning the regiment attended service at Grace Church, and Bishop Thomas M. Clark preached. In the afternoon I tried to get a pass to go to Pawtuxet, but did not succeed. The captain did give me a pass to go out of camp, but not to leave the city. He made me wear my belt and cartridge box, which rig I did not like, but not knowing enough of the world to disobey orders, I kept it on while I made farewell calls upon my friends. At night we had dress parade, and the camp was filled with the friends of the soldiers. Frederick Miller presented me with a Smith & Wesson 7-shooting revolver and a holster to carry it in. All sorts of useful and ornamental articles were given to us by our friends. I had a silver spoon, knife, and fork, and a knapsack full of traps that were supposed to be of use to me. The 2nd Rhode Island paraded through Exchange Place, now Kennedy Plaza, in Providence on their way to join the Army of the Potomac. Wednesday, June 19th, 1861. Today we have orders to pack up and be ready to leave Rhode Island for Washington. This is new business for us, and the work of taking down the tents is slowly performed. Toward night, we slung our knapsacks and moved down High Westminster and South Main streets to Fox Point, where we went on board the sidewheel steamer State of Maine. The streets were crowded with people, and we were observed continually. My knapsack was heavy. In fact, it was so heavy that I could hardly stagger under the load. At the wharf, an immense crowd had gathered, and we went on board our steamer with mingled feelings of joy and sorrow. After leaving the wharf, I, with others, fell in for rations. A man stood beside a cask or barrel, and as I passed, he threw into my haversack that I held open a piece of boiled corned beef. It proved to be entirely of fat, and as I did not like fat, I threw it overboard and made a supper upon dry bread. The colonel made us go to bed early, and so, spreading my blanket upon the floor of the saloon, I went to sleep. We were not allowed to make any noise, and soon all was quiet. Thursday, June 20th, 1861. We arrived this morning in New York, and as I had only visited New York once before, I enjoyed the sail up to the city. We touched at a wharf, and after remaining a few minutes, steamed down the harbor and landed at Elizabethport, New Jersey. Here we found a long train of cars, and we were soon on board and off for Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. All day we dragged along or waited at stations for other trains. We moved so slowly that, at times, the men got off and walked. We had to sleep on the train, and being crowded, the night was one of much discomfort. When morning came, it showed a party of very weary men. We descended upon the contents of our haversacks for food, and the supply was limited. June 21st, 1861. Today we are still on the cars and on the road between Harrisburg and Baltimore. We move slowly and are much interested in the scenes from the windows. The little towns and hamlets through which we pass turn out apparently all their inhabitants, who stare at the Yankees as if we were wild beasts. Just before dark, ammunition was issued to companies C and D. We were given 3 rounds each, which were placed in our cartridge boxes. It being the first warlike ammunition I had ever seen, I examined mine with much interest. A few percussion caps were also handed to each of us. We were ordered not to load our muskets until orders were given, and not to fire until we got the word from our captain. Our muskets are old-fashioned, smooth-bore, flintlock guns, altered over to percussion locks, and the cartridge contains 1 round ball and 3 buckshot. We arrived in Baltimore after dark and disembarked from the cars to march through the city to the Washington depot. Immense crowds met us at the depot, and the streets were lined with people who shouted for Jeff Davis and abused us roundly. But we said not a word and plodded on. Governor Sprague was with us, and many questions were asked concerning him, but remembering our orders not to speak to anyone, we took no notice of the people or their talk. The march nearly killed me, for my knapsack was so heavy that I could hardly move, but fear of the people kept me from falling out of line, and at last we reached the Washington depot. Here we took the cars, and the balance of the night was passed on the road to Washington, only 40 miles distant. Saturday, June 22nd, 1861. Hurrah! We are in Washington, and what a city! Mud, pigs, geese, Negroes, palaces, shanties, everywhere. We marched out to a place called Gale's Woods, where we are to camp, and stacked arms in Camp Sprague, the home of the 1st Rhode Island Detached Militia. Here we were cordially received by our Rhode Island comrades, and breakfast was given to us. I took breakfast at the Tiger's Retreat, this being the name given to the barracks of Company A, or National Cadets of the 1st Regiment. After breakfast, we went down into the woods and pitched our tents. Our camp has been named Camp Clark in honor of Bishop Thomas M. Clark of Rhode Island. Well, this looks like soldiering, and also work. Sunday, June 23rd, 1861, our first Sunday from home, and it has been a queer one to me. At 11 o'clock in the morning, our regiment joined with the 1st Regiment in church service. The scene, to me, was a solemn and impressive one. Our chaplain, Reverend Thorndike C. Jameson, preached a fine sermon. The camp has been full of visitors all day, and things have been lively. Not much like a Sunday in Rhode Island, but yet we have tried to keep the day holy and recognize the fact that God is still our Lord. Monday, June 24th, 1861. Today we brushed up and marched into Washington and were reviewed by the President. As we passed the White House, I had my first view of Abraham Lincoln. He looks like a good, honest man, and I trust that with God's help, he can bring our country safely out of its peril. I was not well pleased with the appearance of the city, but was struck with the magnitude of the public buildings. The Capitol, although unfinished, is a magnificent structure, and every American should be proud of it. After the review, we returned to our camp. Thursday, June 28th, 1861. For the past few days, we have been busy putting Camp Clark in order, and now we shall settle down to work and drill. Today, we had a Union dress parade with the 1st Regiment on their parade ground. It was a fine sight to see 2 large regiments drawn up in line. The parade concluded with prayer and the singing of the doxology by the men. Sunday, June 31st, 1861. We are having a rain today, and so services have been omitted. We have employed our time in writing letters to our friends and in reading. Our Sibley tents are very comfortable, and we feel quite at home. We march to our meals up to the camp of the 1st Rhode Island, where the food is cooked. We have excellent food, and not at all as I thought it would be. If we take the field, I guess there will be a change of diet. Plum pudding, gingerbread, milk, and other good things are served daily. Camp Clark, July 4th, 1861, our first Independence Day in the Army, and we have had a grand celebration. Reverend Augustus Woodbury, chaplain of the 1st Rhode Island Detached Militia, read the Declaration of Independence to both the 1st and 2nd Rhode Island regiments at 9 o'clock in the morning. Prayer was offered by Chaplain Jameson of the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers, and a fine oration delivered by Reverend Father Quinn, Assistant Chaplain to the 1st Rhode Island. Captain Cyrus G. Dyer, Company A, 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers, followed with an excellent poem. At 12 noon, a national salute was fired by the light battery, and we were invited to a fine dinner. Professor Benoni Sweet, a member of Company H, 2nd Rhode Island, gave an exhibition of tightrope walking. Our camp has been full of people all day. In fact, we are in the habit of seeing many distinguished men at our parade. Night before last, July 2nd, there were present the Honorable Salmon P. Chase, Secretary of the Treasury, Colonel John C. Fremont, the great Pathfinder, James F. Smith, Esquire of Rhode Island, and others. July 9th, 1861. We have had a sad accident today. While on drill, a caisson belonging to our battery exploded and killed 2 men and wounded 3 others. This sad affair has cast a gloom over our camps, and it gives us our first idea of the terrible effect of gunpowder. Governor Sprague has taken up his quarters with our regiment. That concludes the first part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.